The day Mercer told me he was leaving, he wore the platinum cufflinks I'd given him for our 50th anniversary just 3 months earlier. He stood in our marble-floored entryway, Burberry luggage by his feet, the same luggage we'd taken to Santorini last spring, and told me our life together had been a comfortable mistake. 50 years reduced to 2 dismissive words while his 28-year-old secretary, Catalina, waited in the Tesla outside our gates. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply nodded and said, "I hope your new life brings you everything you deserve." He looked almost disappointed as he walked out, as though he'd expected hysteria, tears, perhaps even violence. What he didn't know was that for the past 15 years, I'd been quietly building an empire that would eventually swallow his whole. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Valencia Thornfield, and I met Mercer in 1973 at Brookhaven University where I was studying economics and mathematics. He was the charismatic architecture student everyone gravitated toward, confident, handsome, with a vision of creating skylines that would rival Manhattan's. I was the quiet one who could calculate complex equations in my head, the one professors called brilliant, but fellow students rarely noticed. We were an unlikely pair, but when Mercer needed help with his structural engineering calculations, for his thesis project, a modern masterpiece that had overwhelmed his mathematical abilities, our paths crossed. I spent weeks perfecting his calculations, translating his ambitious vision into numbers that worked, that made his impossible dream buildable. The night before his presentation, we stayed up until dawn, and as the sun rose over campus, casting long shadows across his architectural model, he looked at me with genuine wonder. "You're a marvel, Valencia," he said. "I couldn't have done this without you." 2 months later, he proposed with a modest diamond ring and the promise that together we would build something extraordinary. The early years were lean but purposeful. We rented a tiny apartment in Westlake, a struggling district with potential that only Mercer seemed to see. While he worked at a small architectural firm, I took a position at First Maritime Bank, analyzing investment portfolios and learning the intricate dance of real estate financing. Each evening, we would spread papers across our second-hand dining table, him with his architectural drawings, me with investment prospectuses, planning our future empire. Our first purchase was a dilapidated 4-unit building 3 blocks from our apartment, bought with a loan secured against my grandmother's antique jewelry and my relentless negotiation with a reluctant loan officer. "We need to start where others are afraid to go," Mercer would say, eyes gleaming with that ambition I so admired. "The overlooked corners, the forgotten neighborhoods, that's where true fortune begins." He was right, of course. That first building tripled in value within 5 years as Westlake began its slow transformation. By our 10th anniversary, we owned 12 properties, and Mercer had founded Thornfield Architectural Development. My name was on the company but not in the title, a detail I overlooked at the time, as my focus remained on the financial architecture that supported his creative vision. Our roles seemed clear and complementary. Mercer was the visionary, the face of our growing empire, while I managed the finances, structured the deals, and ensured our expanding portfolio remained profitable. When Parkside Tower, our first major downtown project, opened to acclaim, it was Mercer who stood before the cameras, cutting the ribbon with the mayor. I stood 3 steps behind him, smiling proudly, content in knowing that without my financial orchestration, that tower would have remained merely a beautiful drawing. That evening, as we celebrated with champagne on our new penthouse balcony, he kissed me deeply and whispered, "We're unstoppable together, Valencia. You're the foundation beneath everything I build." For decades, this arrangement worked seamlessly. Thornfield Development grew from local prominence to regional power. Our children, twins Edison and Adelaide, attended prestigious universities and showed little interest in the family business. Edison pursued medicine, eventually becoming a cardiac surgeon in Vienna, while Adelaide chose international humanitarian law, her work taking her to tribunals and crises across the globe. They visited rarely but called often, their lives expansive and independent, just as we'd raised them to be. By our 40th anniversary, Thornfield Development had expanded beyond Westlake into 7 states, with signature properties that transformed skylines from Portland to Phoenix. Mercer's reputation had grown legendary, the visionary architect who revitalized forgotten neighborhoods without displacing communities, who built sustainable structures before sustainability was fashionable. I remained his silent partner, the financial wizard whose strategies enabled his creative risks. At industry events, I was introduced as Mercer's wife, despite having orchestrated the complex financing that made each project possible. Perhaps that should have bothered me more than it did. But I found satisfaction in the elegant equations of our success, in watching my financial projections materialize into soaring structures and thriving communities. When Mercer received the Architectural Visionary Award on our 45th anniversary, he thanked me briefly as my supportive wife and the mother of my children. Not as his business partner, not as the financial architect behind every successful venture. I smiled and applauded with everyone else, ignoring the slight ache beneath my breastbone. That same year, Catalina Reyes joined Thornfield Development as Mercer's executive assistant. I remember meeting her at the company holiday party, striking, intelligent, with a master's degree in urban planning and ambition that reminded me of my younger self. I admired her sharp questions about our riverfront renewal project and suggested to Mercer that she might be valuable on the development team. He agreed enthusiastically, mentioning how refreshing her young perspective was for the company. I didn't think much of it then. After 45 years of marriage, suspicion wasn't my natural inclination. The changes were subtle at first. Mercer began working later. Weekends became consumed with essential site visits that couldn't wait until Monday. He purchased a new wardrobe, designer suits that emphasized his still trim physique, subtly different colognes that I didn't select. His phone became a jealously guarded possession, always face down, always locked. When I asked about these changes, his explanations were reasonable. Increased competition necessitated longer hours. His position demanded a certain appearance. Privacy concerns required better phone security. I chose to believe him because disbelief seemed unthinkable after half a century together. Besides, I had my own projects consuming my attention. 5 years earlier, I had established the Thornfield Community Investment Fund, officially a charitable foundation focused on educational opportunities for women in finance. Unofficially, it was my private investment vehicle, separate from Thornfield Development. Each year, I diverted a portion of our profits, with Mercer's distracted approval, into this fund, which then made strategic investments in emerging technologies, sustainable energy, and, ironically, competing real estate ventures. When our 50th anniversary approached, I suggested a vow renewal, a grand celebration of our enduring partnership, both personal and professional. Mercer seemed surprisingly hesitant, but eventually agreed. The ceremony was lavish, covered by architectural magazines and local media, held in the rooftop garden of our most acclaimed building. I wore cream silk, Mercer a bespoke tuxedo. We renewed promises made half a century earlier, his voice slightly hoarse as he pledged continued fidelity and partnership. 200 guests applauded as we shared champagne and cut a 5-tiered cake designed to replicate our first development project. Looking back, I realize his eyes never quite met mine throughout the entire celebration. 3 months later, on a pristine Thursday morning, while reviewing quarterly projections in my home office, I received an unexpected call from my old friend Dorothea Winters, who managed private banking for several prominent families. "Valencia, darling," she said, her voice uncharacteristically tentative. "I'm calling as your friend, not your banker. Mercer was here yesterday, moving significant assets to separate accounts. New accounts without your name. My hands remained steady as I opened my laptop. How significant, Dorothea? Nearly 40 million. He's liquidating his shares in the Charleston Harbor project and the Minneapolis high-rise. She paused. There's more. He inquired about international wire transfers to accounts in St. Barthélemy. I thanked her calmly and hung up, then spent the next several hours methodically accessing every account, every holding, every investment connected to our shared empire. What I discovered wasn't entirely surprising. Mercer had begun disentangling his assets from mine nearly 18 months earlier, gradually, carefully, in ways designed not to trigger my attention. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He'd established shell companies, rerouted profits, and positioned himself for a clean separation. What he failed to realize was that 30 years earlier, I had established my own network of safeguards and separate holdings. While he focused on designing physical structures, I had architected our financial framework with multiple redundancies and protective mechanisms. Every contract, every property deed, every financing agreement had subtle clauses and contingencies that could be activated under specific circumstances. Legal tripwires, I called them privately, invisible unless you knew precisely where to look. I closed my laptop just as I heard Mercer's key in the front door. I smoothed my hair, applied fresh lipstick, and went downstairs to greet my husband, of 50 years. He looked handsome and uncomfortable in the entryway, his Burberry luggage arranged neatly by his Italian leather shoes. His face, still striking at 72, held an expression I'd never seen before, something between defiance and apology. "Valencia," he began, voice steady, but hands fidgeting with his platinum cufflinks. "My anniversary gift." I've tried to find the right words, but there aren't any. Our marriage has run its course. I remained silent, observing him like an interesting architectural drawing with a structural flaw. "I'll always respect what we built together," he continued, seemingly emboldened by my silence. "But the truth is, I need something different at this stage of my life. A different kind of partner, a different kind of freedom." "Catalina?" I said, not a question. He nodded, relief washing over his features at not having to say it himself. "She understands me creatively. There's an energy between us that—" He stopped, perhaps realizing the cruelty in such comparisons. "I've been fair in the division of assets. You'll want for nothing, Valencia. The house, your foundation, sufficient investments to maintain your lifestyle. My lawyers will contact. Yours tomorrow." I allowed the silence to stretch between us, watching him grow increasingly uncomfortable. 50 years, I finally said, is a significant investment. He flinched slightly at my choice of words. "It's been a comfortable mistake?" I finished. For him, smiling slightly. "No, Mercer. Our marriage wasn't the mistake. Your assumption that I would simply accept your terms, that's the mistake." Confusion flickered across his face. Before he could respond, a car horn sounded from our circular driveway, 2 short beeps, impatient and young. "You should go," I said. "Catalina's waiting and I have calls to make." He hesitated, clearly thrown by my composure. "Valencia, I hope we can remain civil. For the sake of our history, for Edison and Adelaide. I hope your new life brings you everything you deserve," I replied, the same pleasant smile still in place. As the door closed behind him, I didn't cry or scream, or break the Murano glass vases he'd brought me from Venice. Instead, I returned to my office and made 3 calls. First to our family attorney, Leopold Finch, who had secretly prepared contingency documents at my request years earlier. Second, to Imani Okafor, my brilliant protégé at the Thornfield Community Investment Fund, and third to my daughter Adelaide, whose legal expertise I now required. "Mother?" Adelaide answered. the 13-hour time difference evident in her groggy voice. "It's the middle of the night here in Bangkok. Your father has left me for his 28-year-old assistant," I said without preamble. "I'm activating Project Phoenix." Silence, then rustling sheets. "Are you certain?" "Once initiated." "I've never been more certain of anything," I interrupted. "How quickly can you return to the States?" "I'll be on the next flight," she replied, fully awake now. "Have you called Edison?" "Not yet. His involvement comes later." I paused. "Adelaide, your father believes this will be a simple, civilized division, a gentle uncoupling after 50 years. My daughter's laugh was low and dangerous. Then he's forgotten who he married. The next morning, as Mercer's lawyer, a brash young man named Carter Phillips, called to arrange the terms of our separation, I was already in the downtown office I'd maintained separate from Thornfield Development for the past decade. Surrounded by my most trusted advisors, including Leopold Finch, who had served our family since before the twins were born, I laid out my strategy. "Mercer believes he's secured his most valuable assets," I explained, projecting a complex organizational chart onto the wall screen. "What he doesn't realize is that the majority of Thornfield Development's properties are leveraged through mechanisms that require dual approval for any significant transaction." Leopold nodded, his ancient fingers tapping the table thoughtfully. "The mutual protection clauses you insisted on in 1992. Brilliant foresight, Valencia." "Not foresight," I corrected. "Insurance. I never expected to use them, but I believe in architectural integrity, both in buildings and legal frameworks." For the next 3 hours, we meticulously reviewed each property in the Thornfield portfolio, identifying vulnerabilities and opportunities. By noon, we had developed a comprehensive strategy that would unfold over the coming months. I was not interested in a quick, vindictive strike. Those were for amateurs and the emotionally undisciplined. What I envisioned required patience, precision, and the careful application of pressure at exactly the right points. "Mrs. Thornfield?" Carter Phillips' voice sounded overly confident when he finally reached me that afternoon. "I'm calling to discuss the terms of your separation. Mr. Thornfield has been incredibly generous in his proposed settlement." "Mr. Phillips," I replied pleasantly, "please inform your client that I will not be accepting any settlement proposals at this time. My team will be conducting a comprehensive audit of all Thornfield assets before any discussions can proceed." His confidence wavered. "That's really not necessary. We've prepared a complete accounting." "I'm sure you have," I interrupted. "However, given the circumstances, I prefer my own accounting. Leopold Finch will be contacting you regarding access to all relevant documents." "Mrs. Thornfield," his voice sharpened, "dragging this out won't benefit anyone. Mr. Thornfield is prepared to be generous, but his patience isn't unlimited." I allowed myself a small smile. "After 50 years of marriage, Mr. Phillips, I understand my husband's patience quite intimately. Please pass along my message. Good day." That evening, Adelaide arrived, exhausted from 30 hours of travel, but immediately alert when we sat down in my home office. My daughter had grown into a formidable woman, brilliant, strategic, with an ethical compass that pointed true, but recognized the complexities of justice. Her expertise in international law and financial regulations had made her a respected figure in global governance circles. "I've reviewed everything you sent," she said, accepting the glass of Bordeaux I offered. "Father has been planning this for at least 2 years. The St. Barthélemy accounts, the restructured holdings in Nevada and Wyoming, the gradual transfer of intellectual property rights for his architectural designs, it's comprehensive. But flawed," I noted. "He focused on the assets he values, the high-profile properties, the award-winning designs, the public-facing elements of our empire. He overlooked the infrastructure." Adelaide smiled, so like me in that moment. "The foundation beneath the tower." "Exactly." I activated my secure tablet, displaying a different organizational chart from the one I'd shown my legal team. This is the actual structure of Thornfield Holdings. Your father is aware of perhaps 60% of it. The rest is secured through the investment fund, through Edison's Medical Research Trust, through your humanitarian foundation, and through a dozen other entities that appear unrelated to our family. My daughter studied the chart, her expression shifting from surprise to admiration. Mother, this is extraordinarily complex. You've created a financial labyrinth. I prefer to think of it as a garden maze, I replied. Beautiful, structured, with clear pathways if you know how to navigate them. Your father never bothered to learn the path. He trusted me to manage the financial architecture while he created physical architecture. Adelaide looked up from the tablet. What exactly are you planning? I'm not destroying your father, Adelaide. I'm simply reclaiming what's rightfully mine, the entire portfolio we built together. Every property, every investment, every brick and beam. I sipped my wine. And I'm going to do it legally, methodically, and so elegantly that he won't realize what's happening until it's complete. My daughter studied me with new eyes, not just as her mother, but as a strategist whose complexity she hadn't fully appreciated until now. Why not just fight for half in the divorce? That would be simpler, cleaner. Because half isn't accurate, I said firmly. Your father designed beautiful buildings, yes. But I financed them, structured the deals, managed the risks, and created the wealth that made each project possible. For 50 years, I was content to stand in his shadow, to be introduced as Mercer's wife, while I quietly built the foundation of everything he claimed credit for. I set down my glass. I'm not seeking revenge, Adelaide. I'm seeking recognition, and I'll obtain it by owning every property in his portfolio. The following week, the first phase of my plan activated when Leopold Finch formally requested a complete accounting of all Thornfield development assets as part of standard divorce proceedings. As expected, Carter Phillips provided a carefully curated list that omitted significant holdings and undervalued others. We accepted this document without comment, which clearly unsettled them. Meanwhile, Imani Okafor began quietly approaching investors in key Thornfield properties with attractive buyout offers through seemingly unrelated investment groups. These investors, many of whom had been brought into Thornfield projects through my relationships and financial networks, were surprised to learn that Mercer was selling, but pleased with the premium offers. By the end of the second week, Mercer called me directly, his voice tight with controlled anger. What are you doing, Valencia? My partners in the Lakeside Development and the Phoenix Towers are telling me they've received buyout offers. I'm not selling those properties. How interesting, I replied calmly. Perhaps they misunderstood. These things happen in business. Stop playing games, he snapped. If you want to discuss the settlement, have your lawyers contact Phillips. These backdoor maneuvers are beneath you. Nothing about protecting. My interests is beneath me, Mercer. I learned that from you. I kept my tone pleasant. By the way, how is St. Bartholomew this time of year? Catalina must be enjoying the beaches. His sharp intake of breath told me everything. How did you... 50 years, Mercer. Did you really think I wouldn't have friends in private banking? Enjoy your vacation. We'll continue this discussion when you return. The third week brought an unexpected complication when Catalina herself appeared at my door without Mercer, looking considerably less confident than the woman who had honked impatiently from my driveway just weeks earlier. Mrs. Thornfield, she began, smoothing her designer dress nervously. I felt we should talk, woman to woman. I invited her in, offered tea, which she declined, and waited silently. I want you to know that I never intended to come between... She stopped at my raised eyebrow. What I mean is, Mercer and I, our connection is genuine. It wasn't about his money or position. Ms. Reyes, I said gently, I've lived 70 years, been married for 50, and built a real estate empire. From nothing. Please don't insult my intelligence with platitudes about genuine connections. She flushed, fingers twisting the expensive watch on her wrist. A gift from Mercer, undoubtedly. I'm trying to be respectful. Respectful would have been declining. My husband's advances. Respectful would have been resigning your position once your relationship became inappropriate. Respectful would have been waiting until our divorce was finalized before accompanying him to St. Bartholomew. I smiled. But we're beyond respect now, aren't we? So why are you really here, Catalina? Her composure cracked slightly. The riverfront project. Something's happening with the financing. The primary lender has called for an immediate review of the capital structure, and 3 key investors have withdrawn. Mercer doesn't understand what's happening, and the board is demanding answers. And there it was, the real reason for her visit. Not woman-to-woman understanding, but panic over the unraveling of Thornfield Development's most prestigious current project, a $300 million riverfront revitalization that would cement Mercer's legacy. How unfortunate, I replied. Financial structures can be so complex, can't they? One small change can affect the entire system. He thinks you're behind it. Her eyes narrowed. Are you? I stood, indicating our conversation was concluding. Catalina, you chose to participate in the dismantling of my marriage. You are not entitled to explanations about my business decisions. Please tell Mercer that if he has concerns about Thornfield Development's projects, he should contact me directly, not send his girlfriend as an emissary. After she left, I called Adelaide. Phase 1 is complete. Mercer is beginning to understand that his financial architecture isn't as solid as he believed. Initiate Phase 2. Phase 2 was considerably more aggressive. Adelaide activated her network of international legal contacts to begin inquiries into the St. Bartholomew accounts, triggering automatic regulatory reviews. Meanwhile, Edison returned from Vienna and began meeting with medical research investors who had interests in both his cardiac innovation work and, coincidentally, several Thornfield development properties. The most crucial element, however, was the series of carefully structured loan calls that Imani Okafor orchestrated through my investment fund's network. One by one, lenders began requesting additional collateral or accelerated payment schedules on Thornfield properties, all standard provisions in the original agreements, but never previously enforced due to my relationships with these financial institutions. By the 6th week, Mercer was back in the country and requesting an urgent meeting. I agreed to see him at my downtown office rather than our home, setting a clear boundary. When he arrived, the confident architect had been replaced by a man showing the first signs of genuine worry. "This has to stop, Valencia," he said without preamble, pacing my office. "The riverfront project is on the verge of collapse. Northwestern Mutual is threatening to pull out of the Minneapolis development. 3 board members have called for an emergency review of all Thornfield projects." He turned to face me. "What exactly are you trying to prove?" I regarded him calmly from behind my desk. "I'm not trying to prove anything, Mercer. I'm simply protecting my interests in the company we built together. By sabotaging projects? By undermining 50 years of work?" His voice rose. "This isn't like you, Valencia. You've always been the rational one, the stabilizing force." "Perhaps you never really knew me," I suggested quietly. "Perhaps while you were accepting awards and cutting ribbons, I was building something you never bothered to understand." He sat heavily in the chair opposite my desk, suddenly looking every day of his 72 years. "What do you want? Half the company? Fine. The house? It's yours. Just stop whatever you're doing." To the financing structures, I leaned forward. "Mercer, I don't want half of anything. I want recognition for my role in building this empire. I want acknowledgement that without my financial architecture, your beautiful buildings would have remained drawings on paper." "So this is about credit?" He sounded incredulous. "After all these years, you're angry that you didn't get enough public recognition?" No, I said firmly. This is about justice. This is about a fair accounting of contributions and rewards. You were planning to walk away with the majority of assets from our life's work, leaving me with what you deemed generous. That's not partnership. That's not respect. He ran a hand through his silver hair, still thick, still carefully styled. What exactly do you want, Valencia? Just tell me, and let's end this war. I slid a document across the desk. These are my terms. Review them with your lawyers if you wish, but they're non-negotiable. Mercer scanned the first page, his face paling. You're asking for control of everything. The entire portfolio. Every property. Every project. Even my architectural firm. Not asking, Mercer. Claiming what's rightfully mine. This is insane, he whispered. You'd destroy everything. We built just to punish me? I stood, smoothing my skirt. I'm not destroying anything. I'm preserving it, under my management. You chose to leave our partnership, personal and professional. These are the consequences of that choice. He left, with the document, ashen-faced but still believing he had options. What Mercer failed to understand was that while he had been planning his exit for 2 years, I had been preparing for contingencies like this for 3 decades. The final phase unfolded over the next 3 months. One by one, Thornfield Properties came under my direct control through a complex series of financial maneuvers, loan accelerations, investor buyouts, triggered clauses in partnership agreements, and strategic acquisitions through my investment fund. Each transaction was legal, meticulous and devastating to Mercer's position. The day I acquired controlling interest in the architectural firm itself, Thornfield Development, Carter Phillips called in a panic. Mrs. Thornfield, this has gone far enough. Mr. Thornfield is prepared to offer extremely generous terms to resolve this situation. Mr. Phillips, I replied pleasantly, the situation is already resolved. As of this morning, I control 62% of Thornfield Development's voting shares. Your client now works for me should I choose to retain his services. The silence on the phone line was profound. I suggest you and Mr. Thornfield review the complete asset transition document my team has prepared. You'll find everything in order. Good day. The final meeting took place in the boardroom of Thornfield Development's headquarters, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, a panorama dominated by buildings Mercer had designed and I had financed. He sat alone on one side of the massive table, while I was flanked by Leopold Finch, Adelaide, Edison, and Imani Okafor. Carter Phillips had resigned from representing Mercer the previous day, citing irreconcilable strategic differences. Congratulations, Mercer said flatly as I entered. You've won. Everything we built together is now yours alone. I hope it brings you satisfaction. This isn't about winning, Mercer, I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table, his former position. It's about correction. Leopold placed the final settlement document before him. It was remarkably simple, given the complexity of what had transpired. In summary, I explained, you will retain your personal assets, approximately $12 million after taxes. You will have a lifetime consulting position with Thornfield Development, should you choose to accept it, with appropriate compensation. You will maintain your professional reputation and legacy as the design visionary behind our most celebrated projects. He looked up sharply. Our projects? Yes, Mercer. I have no intention of erasing your architectural contributions. Unlike you, I believe in giving credit where it's due. He studied me, confusion evident. I don't understand. If you're acknowledging my role, why take everything? Because you never acknowledged mine, I said simply. For 50 years, I was the invisible partner, the foundation beneath your towers. I financed your vision, structured the deals that built your legacy, managed the wealth that funded your dreams. Yet when you decided to leave, you assumed you could simply divide our empire based on what you valued and what you didn't. I leaned forward. The company will now be renamed Thornfield and Thornfield Development, reflecting both our contributions. Every project will credit both the architectural design and the financial architecture that made it possible. And yes, I will control the company because you chose to abandon our partnership. Mercer sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of understanding finally settling across his features. And Catalina? He finally asked. Is no longer employed by Thornfield and Thornfield, Adelaide answered crisply. Her separation agreement includes standard non-disclosure provisions and a generous severance, considering her brief tenure. He nodded slowly, then looked up at me with something approaching genuine recognition for perhaps the first time in decades. You're formidable, Valencia. I suppose I always knew that, but I never truly appreciated it. No, I agreed. You didn't. The property portfolio I reclaimed is now valued at over $2 billion. Mercer did accept the consulting position, working remotely from a modest home in Portland where he lives alone, Catalina having departed shortly after discovering his assets were significantly diminished. We speak professionally every few weeks, discussing ongoing projects with a strange new respect that never existed during our marriage. Edison and Adelaide have both taken board positions with Thornfield and Thornfield, bringing their unique expertise to the company's future direction. And I, at 72, have finally stepped into the full recognition of my capabilities, leading the company from the corner office with the same precision and vision that quietly guided it from the shadows for 5 decades. Sometimes people ask if I'm bitter about the 50 years I spent as Mercer's wife, rather than his acknowledged equal. I tell them no. Those years taught me patience, strategic thinking, and the power of building solid foundations beneath beautiful structures, lessons that ultimately allowed me to reclaim everything I helped create. I don't consider what I did revenge. I consider it the most perfect architectural restoration of my life's work. Every property, every investment, every brick and beam, finally under the proper ownership. Though I maintained perfect composure, as Mercer walked out our door, something inside me shattered the moment I was truly alone. 50 years of memories crashed over me like a tidal wave. Our wedding day in the university chapel, Edison and Adelaide's birth when Mercer wept holding their tiny bodies, countless nights reviewing blueprints and financial projections across our dining table, the ribbon cutting at Parkside Tower, our vow renewal just 3 months earlier. Each memory now tainted with a terrible question. Had it all been a lie? I allowed myself exactly 3 hours of grief. 3 hours to sit in my garden, watching the koi glide through the pond Mercer had designed for our 30th anniversary, allowing tears to fall unchecked. 3 hours of anger, betrayal, humiliation. Then I rose, washed my face, and walked to my office. Emotions were a luxury I could no longer afford. Strategy required clarity. The next morning, I received the first text message from Mercer. Carter. Phillips will be calling to discuss settlement. I've been more than fair. I didn't respond. Fairness wasn't a value determined by the party attempting to claim the larger share. That afternoon, Leopold Finch arrived at my home, his ancient leather briefcase containing 5 decades of our legal documents. At 84, Leopold moved more slowly than when he'd first represented us in purchasing that dilapidated 4-unit building, but his mind remained razor-sharp. I've already begun reviewing the files you requested, he said, settling into my office with the cup of Earl Grey I'd prepared exactly as he preferred, 1 sugar, splash of milk. Most concerning are the apparent transfers to St. Barthélemy. Tax haven, limited financial disclosure requirements, classic opener for asset concealment. I nodded, pulling up the records Dorothea had quietly sent over. 40 million is just what we know about. I suspect there's more. Mercer established 3 new LLCs in the past 18 months. Leopold, I need to understand exactly what he's been moving and where. The old attorney's eyes narrowed. Valencia, in all the years I've known you, you've been the financial compass of Thornfield Development. Are you saying you weren't aware of these entities? Mercer has been increasingly private about certain aspects of the business, I admitted, the words tasting bitter. He established a separate team for what he called special projects. I allowed it because... My voice trailed off as I confronted my own complicity in this situation. Because you trusted your husband of half a century, Leopold finished, gently. A miscalculation I won't repeat. I straightened my shoulders. Leopold, I want a complete forensic accounting of every Thornfield asset, every subsidiary, every project. I want to know exactly what Mercer believes he controls independently of me. And I want to understand every vulnerability in his position. Leopold hesitated. Valencia, if we're discussing a divorce settlement... We're not discussing a settlement, I interrupted. We're discussing a reclamation. Something in my tone must have convinced him of my resolve, because he simply nodded and opened his briefcase. Then we should begin with the mutual protection clauses from 1992. For the next 6 hours, we meticulously dissected the complex legal architecture of Thornfield Development. What emerged was both troubling and oddly reassuring. Mercer had, indeed, been methodically separating assets, establishing independent control over several high-profile projects, and redirecting profits through structures designed to exclude me. However, his focus had been almost exclusively on the visible, prestigious properties, the award-winning towers, the landmark developments, the architectural masterpieces that bore his design signature. He's overlooked the infrastructure, I murmured, studying the organizational flowcharts we'd created. The financing mechanisms, the landholding companies, the management entities. Leopold peered at me over his reading glasses. Those have always been your domain. Yes, I agreed, a plan beginning to crystallize in my mind. Mercer values the buildings themselves, the physical structures, the design legacy. He's never fully appreciated the financial architecture that makes them possible. And that, Leopold said with the ghost of a smile, may prove to be his undoing. That evening, as Leopold departed with a lengthy to-do list, I received a call from my daughter, Adelaide. The 13-hour time difference meant it was mid-morning, in Bangkok. Mother, Dorothea Winters just contacted me. Something about father moving assets? What's happening? I sighed, reluctant to burden my children but knowing they deserved the truth. Your father has left me for Catalina Reyes. They're currently in St. Barthélemy, where he's established accounts to receive funds he's been systematically removing from our joint holdings. Adelaide's sharp intake of breath carried across continents. I don't even have words. After 50 years? For his assistant? It's contemptible. Indeed, I agreed, my voice steady. More pressingly, he's attempting to claim majority ownership of Thornfield Development's most valuable assets, while offering me what he considers a generous settlement. Which is what, exactly? The house, my foundation, and about 1/8 of what would constitute a fair division. I kept my tone matter-of-fact, though the injustice still burned. That's not just unfair, it's laughable. Adelaide's voice had taken on the precise, measured cadence she used in international tribunals. Mother, I'm coming home. This requires my full attention. Adelaide, your work in Bangkok can wait, she finished firmly. This is family, and this is justice. 2 things I never compromise on. I'm booking a flight now. After we disconnected, I called Edison in Vienna, where he was leading a groundbreaking clinical trial on artificial heart valves. Unlike his sisters, immediate righteous anger, Edison responded with quiet calculation. You need to freeze everything, he said after I explained the situation. Every account, every asset, every project. Legal holds across the board while a complete audit is conducted. That would potentially damage ongoing projects, I pointed out. Thousands of jobs, millions in investments. Mother, Edison's voice was gentle but insistent. Father is attempting to steal your life's work. The time for protecting the business at your own expense is over. His words struck me with unexpected force. How many times over the decades had I prioritized Thornfield Development's interests above my own? How often had I accepted less recognition, less control, less credit to maintain harmony and protect the enterprise we were building? You're right, I said finally. But I'm not going to freeze everything. I'm going to be strategic. I've never known you to be anything else, my son replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I'll arrange coverage for my patients and be there by the end of the week. After ending the call, I sat alone in my office, watching darkness settle over the garden Mercer and I had planned together 20 years earlier. The stone pathways, the carefully positioned flowering trees, the koi pond with its gentle waterfall, all of it designed with precision and purpose, much like the financial structures I had created to support our empire. A notification lit up my phone. A photo from Catalina's social media account, hastily posted and then deleted, but not before one of Adelaide's junior associates had captured it. Mercer and Catalina on a white sand beach, champagne flutes raised. Toward the sunset, her diamond bracelet, new, undoubtedly a gift from my husband, catching the golden light. The casual display of their relationship, so soon after he had walked out of our home, sent a wave of cold fury through me. For 50 years, I had been the stabilizing force in our partnership, the pragmatic counterbalance to Mercer's creative vision. I had managed our finances, structured our deals, secured our wealth, all while allowing him to stand in the spotlight alone. I had been content in that role, finding satisfaction in watching our shared vision materialize into soaring towers and thriving communities. But that night, sitting in the growing darkness, I made a decision that would alter the course of everything we had built. I would no longer be the invisible partner, the foundation beneath the tower. I would reclaim my rightful place, not just as co-creator of our empire, but as its rightful owner and leader. The following morning, I met with Imani Okafor at the downtown offices of the Thornfield Community Investment Fund. At 38, Imani had become my most trusted lieutenant, a financial prodigy with both brilliant analytical skills and impeccable ethical standards. I had personally recruited her from the London School of Economics 12 years earlier, mentoring her despite Mercer's initial skepticism. He's really done it, she said, reviewing the financial movements we'd documented. After everything you've built together. Her voice held disbelief tinged with outrage. People reveal themselves in crisis, I replied, or in this case, in what they perceive as opportunity. I activated the secure display wall, projecting a complex map of Thornfield Development's complete asset structure. Imani, I need your absolute discretion and your absolute focus. What I'm about to propose goes beyond standard financial management. Her posture straightened, eyes sharp and attentive. You have both, without reservation. I'm going to reclaim every property in the Thornfield portfolio, I stated simply. Not half in a settlement. Every building, every project, every investment. To her credit, Imani didn't question whether this was possible or advisable. She simply studied the organizational chart with increased intensity. The mutual protection clauses from the early 90s give you significant leverage, assuming father hasn't found a way to neutralize them. He hasn't, I confirmed. Leopold verified that yesterday. Those clauses require dual approval for any significant transaction affecting the core portfolio. Mercer can't sell or transfer those properties without my signature. But that's defensive, Imani noted. It prevents further asset movement but doesn't help you acquire his share. Correct. I highlighted a different section of the chart. That's where the investment fund comes in. For 15 years, we've been building a separate capital structure, officially for community investment and educational initiatives. Imani's eyes widened slightly as understanding dawned. But unofficially, it's been acquiring strategic positions in entities connected to Thornfield properties. Small positions, nothing that would trigger reporting requirements or attract attention, I confirmed. But combined with the lending relationships we've cultivated, they give us potential control points throughout the portfolio. For the next 3 hours, we developed what Imani dubbed Operation Foundation, a multi-phase strategy to systematically consolidate control of the entire Thornfield empire. It would begin with subtle financial pressure points, calling loans that were technically in covenant violation, activating cross-default provisions, and approaching Thornfield investors with premium buyout offers through seemingly unrelated investment groups. The key, I emphasized, is that none of this can appear coordinated. Each action must seem like an independent business decision by separate entities responding to market conditions or financial concerns. Imani nodded, making detailed notes. The riverfront project is particularly vulnerable. 3 of the primary investors have financing through banks where the investment fund has significant relationships. Start there, I instructed. But move gradually. I don't want panic or market disruption. This isn't about destroying value. It's about transferring ownership. As Imani continued analyzing vulnerabilities in Mercer's position, I turned my attention to the public narrative. Thornfield Development had been a respected name in architectural circles for decades, with Mercer as its charismatic figurehead. Any significant change in control would attract media attention I wanted to carefully manage. We'll need a communication strategy, I mused, something that acknowledges the changes without creating instability among clients, partners, or employees. Imani looked up from her tablet. Perhaps a gradual transition narrative? After 50 years of marriage and business partnership, you're taking a more visible leadership role while Mercer focuses on special projects or legacy initiatives? Perfect, I agreed. It sounds respectful, planned, natural, not a hostile takeover, but an evolution of leadership. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Leopold. Carter Phillips requesting urgent meeting tomorrow. Claims to have settlement proposal requiring immediate attention. I showed the message to Imani, who raised an eyebrow. They're moving. Quickly. They must be concerned about something. Or Catalina is getting impatient about accessing Mercer's funds, I suggested dryly. Either way, I have no intention of meeting with Phillips before our strategy is fully in place. I typed a brief response to Leopold. Unavailable for meeting. Conducting comprehensive asset review before any settlement discussions. By late afternoon, Adelaide's flight had landed, and she came directly to the investment fund offices, still carrying her travel bag. Despite 30 hours in transit, she looked formidable in her tailored suit, her eyes alert and focused. I've reviewed everything you sent, she said, accepting the coffee Imani offered. The St. Barthélemy accounts are particularly troubling. That jurisdiction was specifically chosen to shield assets from disclosure. Can you penetrate that shield? I asked. My daughter's smile was subtle but confident. Mother, I've spent the past decade navigating international financial regulations. St. Barthélemy offers confidentiality, but it's not impenetrable, especially when there are questions about the legitimacy of fund transfers. Define questions about legitimacy, I prompted. Transfers made without proper board approval, movements that potentially violate shareholder agreements, transactions that might constitute self-dealing, Adelaide enumerated, all of which appear potentially applicable in this case. I exchanged glances with Imani. We were just discussing the riverfront project's vulnerable capital structure. Adelaide nodded thoughtfully. Start there, but we need to move on multiple fronts simultaneously. Father's been planning this for at least 18 months. We need to accelerate our response. The next morning, as promised, Carter Phillips. attempted to schedule an urgent settlement meeting. Leopold deflected skillfully, citing the need for complete financial disclosure before any meaningful discussions could proceed. Meanwhile, Adelaide activated her network of international legal contacts to begin inquiries into the St. Barthélemy financial system. Not direct inquiries about father's accounts, she clarified over breakfast in my kitchen. That would alert him. Instead, general regulatory reviews that will naturally encompass his activities. Edison arrived that evening, looking tired but determined. Unlike Adelaide's righteous legal mind or my financial acumen, Edison brought a different perspective, the measured analytical approach of a surgeon. Before we implement any strategy, he insisted during our family dinner, we need to understand father's psychological positioning. What's driving this beyond the obvious midlife crisis with Catalina? Adelaide rolled her eyes. He's 72. Edison, that's not midlife unless he's planning to reach 144. Fine, late life crisis then, Edison conceded. But my point stands. Father has always been motivated by legacy, by how he's perceived. This move, leaving mother, attempting to claim the majority of assets, contradicts his carefully cultivated public image as a visionary with integrity. I considered this as I sipped my wine. You're suggesting there's something more at stake than just the relationship with Catalina or the money itself. Edison nodded. Exactly. People don't radically change their core values overnight. Even for romantic infatuation, there's another factor we're missing. Financial pressure, perhaps? Imani suggested, joining us for dinner at my invitation. Could Thornfield Development be facing challenges we're not aware of? A chill ran through me at the thought. Had Mercer been hiding financial problems along with his relationship with Catalina? Had the empire we'd built together been compromised in ways I hadn't detected? Tomorrow, I decided, we begin a complete forensic audit of every Thornfield project, every subsidiary, every investment. If there are hidden problems, we need to identify them before they can be used against us. Later that night, unable to sleep in the bedroom Mercer and I had shared for decades, I moved to the guest suite and opened my laptop. Through secure access protocols, I began reviewing the internal financial reports for our most recent developments. Nothing immediately concerning appeared. Healthy cash flows, solid occupancy rates in completed properties, construction projects proceeding on schedule and within budget. Yet something felt off, small discrepancies in the reporting, minor inconsistencies in how certain expenses were categorized. Nothing that would trigger standard audit flags, but enough to catch my experienced eye. I made detailed notes until dawn began to lighten the sky outside my window. At 7 a.m., I called Imani. I need you to look at something. The Lakeside and Parkside Tower financials from the past 18 months. There's a pattern I'm seeing but can't quite place. 3 hours later, Imani arrived at my home with a secure tablet and grim expression. You were right to be concerned. The reporting inconsistencies are deliberate, designed to obscure a pattern of fund movements. To where? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Initially to a series of project management entities that don't actually manage any projects, then to holding companies in Nevada and Wyoming, and presumably from there to St. Barthélemy. She displayed a series of transaction records, highlighted, to show the pattern. It's sophisticated, I'll give them that. The amounts are just below reporting thresholds, the timing irregular enough to avoid pattern detection. How much? My voice remained steady despite the growing knot in my stomach. Conservatively, at least $65 million over the past year. Possibly more before that, but the trail gets harder to follow. I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing the magnitude of Mercer's betrayal. Not just leaving me for a younger woman, not just attempting to claim the majority of our assets in the split, but actively siphoning funds for what could only be described as theft. This changes our approach, I said finally. This isn't just about reclaiming what's rightfully mine anymore. This is about protecting the company itself from systematic looting. Imani nodded gravely. The good news, if we can call it that, is that these unauthorized transfers give us tremendous leverage. This isn't just a divorce matter now. It's potential securities fraud, breaches of fiduciary duty, maybe even criminal misappropriation. I don't want criminal charges, I said quickly. That would devastate the company's reputation, harm thousands of employees, and ultimately destroy much of what we've built. Then what do you want, Valencia? Imani asked softly. The question hung in the air between us, forcing me to articulate what, until now, had been a simmering determination without clear boundaries. I want Thornfield development. Every property. Every project. Every investment. I want Mercer to retain his personal wealth, minus what he's improperly transferred. I want him to maintain his professional reputation as an architectural visionary. But I want control of the empire we built together, and I want recognition as its true creator and leader. Imani studied me for a long moment. You're not looking for revenge, you're looking for correction. Exactly, I agreed, the word feeling precisely right. A correction of the historical record, of the public narrative, of the power imbalance that has defined our partnership for 50 years. By noon, Adelaide and Edison had joined us, along with Leopold Finch and his associate, a sharp young attorney who specialized in corporate governance. I briefed them on what Imani had discovered, watching the expressions shift from shock to determination. This is beyond anything I imagined, Adelaide said, pacing the length of my home office. He's been systematically looting the company while planning his exit. It's practically a textbook case of breach of fiduciary duty. Edison, ever the pragmatist, focused on immediate containment. We need to secure the remaining assets immediately. Freeze remaining transfers, lock down accounts, implement emergency governance protocols. Leopold nodded in agreement. I've prepared the documentation for temporary financial controls pending a full board review. As co-founder and major shareholder, Valencia has standing to request these measures given evidence of potential misappropriation. And the St. Barthélemy accounts? I asked Adelaide. I've already initiated discreet inquiries through regulatory channels, she confirmed. But recovery of those funds will take time and could get messy. Better to focus on securing what hasn't yet been transferred. There's something else to consider, Imani added quietly. Catalina's role in all this. Given her position as Mercer's executive assistant, she would have had access to financial reports, board materials, maybe even signature authority on certain accounts. The thought had occurred to me as well. Had Catalina been merely the catalyst for Mercer's midlife crisis, or had she been actively involved in the financial manipulation? Had she targeted Mercer specifically because of his wealth and position? We need to understand her involvement, I agreed. But carefully. If she's complicit, alerting her could lead to acceleration of fund movements or destruction of evidence. As the meeting continued, my phone buzzed with another text from Mercer. Valencia, this silence is counterproductive. Phillips has a fair offer ready. Let's handle this with dignity. I showed the message to the group, unable to suppress a bitter laugh at his mention of dignity. Don't respond, Adelaide advised. Any communication should go through Leopold now, and only after we've secured the assets and gathered complete documentation. For the remainder of that day, and well into the night, we worked methodically to implement financial safeguards across the Thornfield empire. Leopold filed emergency governance motions with the board of directors, citing evidence of unauthorized fund transfers. Adelaide coordinated with banking partners to place temporary holds on major accounts pending resolution of signatory authority questions. Edison reviewed all active project contracts for vulnerability points. By midnight, the immediate bleeding had been stopped. No additional funds could be transferred without multiple approvals. Key accounts were secured, and banking partners were on alert for suspicious activity. It wasn't a complete solution, but it bought us time to implement our broader strategy. The following morning brought the first counter-move from Mercer's camp. Carter Phillips called Leopold, his voice tight with controlled anger. "What exactly does Mrs. Thornfield think she's doing? These emergency financial controls are completely unwarranted and potentially damaging to ongoing projects." Leopold's response was measured and precise. "My client has identified concerning patterns of fund transfers that appear to violate company governance protocols and possibly state and federal securities regulations. The temporary controls are a standard protective measure pending full investigation." "This is absurd," Phillips snapped. "Mr. Thornfield has always had full authority to manage company finances. These allegations are nothing but divorce tactics. I suggest you review the corporate bylaws and the mutual protection clauses from 1992, Leopold replied calmly. "Mr. Thornfield's authority has always been subject to specific limitations and approval requirements for certain transactions. As for divorce tactics, I would remind you that it was your client who initiated the separation and who has been transferring substantial assets to offshore accounts without proper disclosure or approval." The call ended abruptly, with Phillips promising to respond appropriately to these baseless allegations. Less than an hour later, Mercer himself called my cell phone. After 5 days of silence since walking out our door, his voice struck me as oddly unfamiliar. "Valencia, this has gone far enough," he began without preamble. "These financial controls are completely unnecessary and potentially damaging to projects that employ thousands of people." "Hello, Mercer," I replied calmly. "I hope St. Bartholomew is pleasant this time of year." His sharp intake of breath confirmed what I already knew. I'm not going to dignify baseless accusations with responses. "Whatever Dorothea Winters told you?" "This isn't about what Dorothea told me," I interrupted. "This is about $65 million transferred to non-operational entities and then moved offshore through a deliberately obscured path over the past 18 months. Transfers that violated our corporate governance protocols, our loan covenants, and possibly federal securities laws." Silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. When Mercer finally spoke, his voice had lost its righteous indignation. "Valencia, there are aspects of our business that have always operated with necessary confidentiality. These are legitimate strategic investments. Strategic investments that coincidentally accelerated as you planned your exit from our marriage. Investments that bypassed all normal approval channels and documentation requirements." I kept my tone even, factual. "Mercer, I've spent 50 years managing the financial architecture of this company. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" "This isn't what you think," he insisted, though with noticeably less conviction. "Then perhaps you should return immediately and provide a full accounting to the board of directors," I suggested. "I'm sure they would be very interested in understanding these strategic investments that have been omitted from all official financial reports and board presentations." Another lengthy silence followed. "I'll be back next week," he finally said. "In the meantime, these restrictions need to be lifted. The riverfront project has time-sensitive financing requirements that can't wait." "The riverfront project has become a particular concern," I noted, allowing a hint of my knowledge to show. 3 of its primary investors have raised questions about capital adequacy and reporting discrepancies. Until those questions are resolved, additional restrictions may be necessary, not fewer. "What have you done?" Mercer's voice had shifted from conciliatory to alarmed. "I haven't done anything, Mercer. I'm simply responding to concerns raised by our investors and financial partners, concerns that apparently existed before I became aware of your offshore activities." "This is going to damage everything we've built," he warned, a desperate edge entering his voice. "That was your choice when you began systematically looting our company while planning your exit," I replied, finally allowing some of my anger to surface. "Did you think I would simply accept whatever settlement you deigned to offer while you walked away with the majority of what we built together, plus tens of millions in improperly transferred funds?" Valencia. We're done with this conversation. Mercer, if you have further communications, direct them through Leopold Finch, and I suggest you return sooner than next week. The board is considering an emergency meeting to address these financial irregularities. I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly despite my outward composure. For 50 years, Mercer and I had been partners in every sense, building a business, raising children, creating communities through our developments. The depth of his betrayal still had the power to shake me, even as I maintained my strategic focus. Adelaide looked up from her laptop as I set down my phone. That sounded productive, she observed dryly. He's coming back next week, I reported, though I suggested he reconsider that timeline. He's realizing the extent of his vulnerability, Edison noted from his position by the window. The question is how he'll respond. Capitulation or escalation? Knowing your father, he'll attempt to regain control through some bold move, I predicted. He's never been comfortable with defensive positions. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an alert from the Thornfield Development Internal Communications System. Mercer had just issued a company-wide announcement from St. Barthélemy. To all Thornfield Development employees and partners, recent disruptions to our normal financial operations are the unfortunate result of personal matters affecting the Thornfield family. I want to assure everyone that these temporary issues will be resolved quickly, and the company's visionary work will continue uninterrupted under my leadership. I have absolute confidence in our future and in the strength of what we've built together. Mercer Thornfield, founder and CEO. Adelaide read the message over my shoulder and gave a small, disbelieving laugh. The arrogance is astounding. He's acting as if this is a minor domestic disagreement, rather than financial misconduct involving tens of millions of dollars. He's trying to control the narrative, Edison observed. Classic damage control. Acknowledge something is happening, but minimize its significance and project confidence. I studied the message again, noting the careful wording. What we've built together, paired with under my leadership, the subtle positioning of himself as the sole founder and decision-maker. Despite my equal role in creating the company, he still doesn't understand what's happening, I said quietly. He truly believes this is something he can manage and contain, that his position is fundamentally secure. Then he's in for a significant awakening, Imani remarked, looking up from her tablet. I've just received confirmations from 2 major lenders on the Riverfront project. Both are exercising their rights to review the entire capital structure based on concerns about reporting discrepancies. And so began the second phase of our strategy, more active and direct than the protective measures of the first phase. Over the next 48 hours, a series of seemingly unrelated financial challenges emerged across the Thornfield portfolio. Lenders exercised audit rights and review provisions. Investors requested additional information about project governance. Regulatory inquiries arrived regarding disclosure practices. None of these actions were fatal to the projects involved, but collectively, they created an environment of heightened scrutiny and financial pressure that would make continuing fund transfers impossible and force Mercer back to the negotiating table. But on my terms, not his. By the end of the week, Mercer's return timeline had accelerated from next week to immediately. Carter Phillips had been urgently requesting meetings with Leopold, his tone shifting from aggressive to increasingly concerned as the financial pressure points multiplied. The evening before Mercer's scheduled return, I sat in my garden watching the koi glide through their pond, their movements graceful and unhurried despite the complete upheaval of my world. Adelaide joined me, offering a glass of the Bordeaux we both preferred. "Are you ready to face him?" she asked quietly. I considered the question carefully. 6 days earlier, Mercer had walked out our door after 50 years of marriage, leaving me for a woman younger than our children, attempting to claim the majority of our shared empire while secretly transferring millions to offshore accounts. The betrayal was total. the disrespect profound. Yet as I sat in the gathering twilight, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't dreading tomorrow's confrontation. I was looking forward to it. "Yes," I said finally. "I'm ready. Not just to face him, but to reclaim everything that's rightfully mine." Mercer's return from St. Barthélemy was not the triumphant homecoming he likely envisioned. There was no press waiting at the airport, no admiring employees lining the lobby of Thornfield Tower. Instead, he arrived at our home on a Wednesday morning, looking travel-worn and tense. The confident architecture magnate who had once commanded every room now stood uncertainly at my doorstep, his expensive luggage at his feet. I had deliberately chosen to meet him in our home rather than at the office. The personal territory would remind him of what he had walked away from, while denying him the authority of his corporate domain. I watched through the security monitor, as he hesitated before ringing the bell, a small, telling pause from a man who had confidently entered this house for 5 decades. Brigitte, the housekeeper I'd hired the day after Mercer left, opened the door with perfect professional detachment. "Mr. Thornfield, Mrs. Thornfield is waiting in the garden room." I had positioned myself carefully, seated at the glass table, overlooking the koi pond, dressed in a sage-green suit that I knew projected both authority and calm. A stack of financial documents lay before me, arranged with deliberate precision. The garden room had always been Mercer's favorite space in our home, his proudest design accomplishment in our personal residence. Now it would serve as the backdrop for his first confrontation with the consequences of his choices. "Valencia," he said, stepping tentatively into the room. "Mercer," I replied, not rising to greet him. "You're looking well rested. The Caribbean agrees with you." His expression tightened at the subtle barb. He glanced at the documents before me, clearly trying to discern their nature. "These financial holds are causing serious disruption. The Riverfront project is at risk. Northwestern Mutual is threatening to pull out of Minneapolis, and the board is demanding answers I don't have." "That's concerning," I replied mildly. "Perhaps you should have considered those possibilities before. Transferring $65 million to offshore accounts without proper authorization or disclosure." Mercer's face flushed, his composure cracking. "Those transfers were legitimate operational movements, part of a strategic—" "Please," I interrupted, sliding the top document toward him. "This is a complete tracking of fund movements from Thornfield, development to non-operational shell companies, then to Wyoming and Nevada holding structures, and finally to St. Barthélemy. None of these transfers had proper board approval. None were disclosed in official financial statements. None followed established governance protocols." He stared at the meticulously documented trail, speechless for perhaps the first time in our decades together. "Did you truly believe I wouldn't notice?" I asked quietly. "After 50 years of managing the financial architecture of this company?" He sank into the chair opposite me, his confidence visibly deflating. "Valencia, this isn't what it appears to be." "Then what is it exactly?" I kept my tone calm, clinical. Mercer ran a hand through his silver hair, still perfectly styled, despite his obvious stress. "It's complicated. The company has been facing increased competition, regulatory pressures. These funds were positioned strategically to maintain flexibility and advantage, while coincidentally being placed beyond my reach as you planned your exit from our marriage?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a remarkable coincidence, Mercer." The silence stretched between us, heavy with half a century of history. Finally, he sighed, a deep exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of his unraveling plans. "What do you want, Valencia? To destroy everything we've built? To create a public scandal that damages our company, our legacy, our children's inheritance?" I studied him carefully, noting the mixture of defensiveness and calculation in his expression. Even now, facing evidence of his betrayal, he was positioning himself as the protector of our shared interests. I want what's rightfully mine, I replied simply. The company we built together, not just the portion you've deemed generous to offer me in your settlement proposal. He blinked, genuinely surprised. The entire company? That's not reasonable, Valencia. I've been the face of Thornfield Development for 50 years. My designs, my vision, supported by my financial acumen, my risk management, my wealth-building strategies, I finished for him. For 50 years, I've been the foundation beneath your towers, Mercer. The invisible partner who made your vision possible. That ends now. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. And Catalina? Is this about her? The question almost made me laugh. Catalina is a symptom, not the cause. This is about recognition and justice. This is about correcting an imbalance that has existed throughout our partnership. You've always had recognition in the areas that mattered to you, he protested. The financial community respects you tremendously. The charitable foundation bears your name. While you collected architectural awards, cut ribbons with mayors, and claimed primary credit for our success, I noted. Tell me, in your acceptance speech for the Architectural Visionary Award, how did you describe my contribution to the empire we built together? His gaze slid away, unable to meet mine. We both knew the answer. He had thanked me as my supportive wife and the mother of my children, not as his equal partner, not as the financial architect who had made his visions buildable. What exactly are you proposing? He asked finally. I slid another document across the table. These are my terms. They're non-negotiable. Mercer scanned the first page, his face paling. You're asking for controlling interest in everything. The entire portfolio, the architectural firm, even my name on the company. Not asking, Mercer. Claiming. This is insane, he whispered. You'd destroy everything we built together just to punish me? I'm not destroying anything, I corrected him. I'm preserving it. Under my management. You chose to leave our partnership, personal and professional. These are the consequences of that choice. He stood abruptly, gathering the documents with shaking hands. I need to review this with my attorneys. This conversation is over. I remained seated, perfectly composed. Of course, take all the time you need. Just understand that while you deliberate, the financial pressure points across the portfolio will continue to intensify. His head snapped up. You're behind the investor inquiries, the lender audits. I'm simply ensuring proper governance and transparency, I replied. Something you seem to have abandoned alongside our marriage vows. As Mercer stormed out, I remained at the glass table, watching the koi glide serenely beneath the water's surface. The confrontation had gone exactly as I'd anticipated. Initial bluster, followed by defensiveness, culminating in retreat. The first direct engagement in what would become a carefully orchestrated campaign to reclaim everything that was rightfully mine. That evening, as expected, Carter Phillips called Leopold Finch, his tone considerably less confident than in previous communications. These terms are completely unreasonable, he began without preamble. Mrs. Thornfield cannot seriously expect to gain control of the entire Thornfield enterprise. Leopold's response was measured and precise. My client is not gaining control of anything, Mr. Phillips. She is maintaining her rightful position in the company she co-founded and co-built over 50 years. It is Mr. Thornfield who attempted to divest her of her proper role and ownership through undisclosed asset transfers and a grossly inadequate settlement offer. The undisclosed transfers were legitimate business operations, Phillips insisted, though with noticeably less conviction. And the settlement offer was generous by any standard. Then perhaps you'd be willing to defend both positions before the SEC, the banking regulators, and the board of directors, Leopold suggested mildly. I'm sure they would be fascinated by your interpretation of legitimate business operations and generous division of marital assets. The threat was clear, though understated. If Mercer chose to fight, the evidence of financial irregularities would become public, triggering regulatory investigations, potential criminal charges, and irreparable damage to his professional reputation. "This is blackmail," Phillips accused. "This is consequence," Leopold corrected. "Your client made specific choices with clear implications. Mrs. Thornfield is simply responding to those choices with appropriate measures to protect her interests." After the call ended, Leopold reported back to me, Adelaide, and Edison, who had gathered in my home office. "They're rattled," he confirmed. Phillips tried to maintain an aggressive stance, but it's clear they recognize their vulnerability. "Will they accept the terms?" Adelaide asked. Leopold considered this, his weathered hands folded on his lap. "Not immediately. Mercer's ego won't allow it. He'll search for counter-leverage, alternative strategies. But ultimately, I believe he will capitulate. The alternative is too damaging to everything he values." Edison nodded in agreement. Father has always prioritized his public reputation and legacy above all else. The possibility of being remembered not as a visionary architect, but as a financial fraudster would be intolerable to him. I reached for my tablet, reviewing the latest updates from Imani. In the meantime, the strategic pressure continues. 2 more investor groups in the Riverfront project have requested emergency meetings regarding capital adequacy. Northwestern Mutual has formally notified the Minneapolis development team of potential financing concerns. The board has scheduled an emergency session for Friday. "Will you attend?" Adelaide asked. "Of course," I replied. As co-founder and major shareholder, my presence is not only appropriate but necessary given the circumstances. That Friday morning, I entered the boardroom of Thornfield Development's headquarters with Adelaide at my side, both of us impeccably dressed and utterly composed. The 14 board members were already seated, their expressions ranging from concern to outright alarm. Mercer sat at the head of the oval table, a position he had occupied exclusively for 5 decades. Without hesitation, I took the empty chair directly opposite him, at the table's other end, a symbolic claiming of equal status that was not lost on anyone present. Adelaide sat to my right, a slim portfolio before her. Mercer's jaw tightened, but he managed a thin smile. "Thank you all for convening on such short notice. As you know, we're facing some temporary financial disruptions that require immediate attention." "Temporary financial disruptions," repeated Bertrand Kavanaugh, the lead independent director, his tone skeptical. "Mercer, 3 major lenders have activated audit provisions. 5 investor groups have raised governance concerns. Northwestern Mutual is threatening to withdraw from Minneapolis entirely. These hardly seem temporary or mere disruptions." Mercer maintained his composed facade. "These issues are being addressed. We've always faced challenges in our projects, and we've always overcome them. Perhaps," Kavanaugh conceded, "but typically not all at once, and not coinciding with major undisclosed asset transfers to offshore accounts." A murmur ran through the room. Clearly, the information about the St. Barthélemy accounts had begun to circulate beyond our immediate circle. "Those transfers have been mischaracterized," Mercer insisted. "They represent legitimate strategic positioning of assets for upcoming international developments." "International developments that weren't presented to this board?" asked Elena Vasquez, who represented our West Coast investors. "Developments that apparently required bypassing normal accounting protocols and disclosure requirements." Before Mercer could respond, I spoke for the first time, my voice clear and steady. "Perhaps we should address the actual issue rather than continuing with these euphemisms. My husband of 50 years has left me for his 28-year-old executive assistant. Simultaneously, he has been systematically transferring company assets to structures beyond normal governance oversight while preparing to offer me a settlement that would remove me from meaningful participation in the company I co-founded and have helped build for 5 decades. The blunt statement landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of discomfort around the table. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, while others stared at their tablets, avoiding eye contact. "This is hardly the forum for personal matters," Mercer said tightly. "I agree completely," I replied, "which is why I have instructed my representatives to focus solely on the governance and financial issues before us. The marital situation is relevant only insofar as it coincides with and potentially motivated the concerning financial movements we're discussing today." Adelaide opened her portfolio and distributed a single-page document to each board member. This summary outlines the specific transactions of concern, their deviation from established governance protocols, and the potential regulatory implications. You'll note that none of these funds were used for any documented international development projects as claimed. The room fell silent as the board members reviewed the document, faces growing increasingly grave. Kavanaugh looked up first, his expression troubled. "Mercer, these transactions, if this documentation is accurate, they represent serious breaches of our governance requirements, banking covenants, and possibly securities regulations." "The documentation is not only accurate, but understated," Adelaide noted calmly. "We've limited this summary to transactions we can verify with absolute certainty. There may be additional movements not yet identified." "This is absurd," Mercer snapped, his composed facade finally cracking. "I've led this company for 50 years with unquestioned authority to make financial decisions. These funds were moved within my standard operational discretion." "Your operational discretion has never extended to undisclosed transfers of this magnitude," I corrected. "The mutual protection clauses established in 1992 specifically required dual approval for any movement exceeding certain thresholds or involving certain classes of assets." "Clauses you agreed to and helped draft," Adelaide added pointedly. Mercer glared at us both, then turned to the board members with an attempt at his usual charismatic confidence. "This is clearly an unfortunate situation inflamed by personal matters. I propose we table this discussion, allow me to provide a complete accounting of these transactions, and reconvene when emotions are less heightened." Elena Vasquez shook her head slowly. "With respect, Mercer, the lenders and investors aren't going to wait for emotions to settle. Northwestern Mutual has given us a 48-hour deadline to address their concerns. The Riverfront Project's primary financing syndicate is meeting Monday to review their position. We need immediate action. What do you suggest?" Kavanaugh asked, looking directly at me. "Transparency and stabilization," I replied without hesitation. "A comprehensive audit of all transactions over the past 24 months. Immediate restoration of proper governance protocols, and temporary leadership adjustments to reassure partners and investors that their concerns are being addressed." "Seriously?" "Leadership adjustments?" Mercer repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "You mean replacing me?" "I mean shared authority," I clarified. "Co-leadership during this transitional period, reflecting the partnership that has always been the foundation of this company, whether publicly acknowledged or not." The board exchanged glances, a silent communication of shared concern and recognition that decisive action was necessary. After a moment, Kavanaugh cleared his throat. "I move that we establish an emergency financial oversight committee, with Valencia and Mercer Thornfield as co-chairs, having joint signatory authority on all transactions exceeding $1 million, until a comprehensive audit is completed and new governance measures are implemented." "Seconded," said Vasquez immediately. Mercer stared incredulously at his longtime allies on the board. "You can't be serious. This company has operated under my vision and leadership for 50 years. "And Valencia's financial architecture," Kavanaugh noted. "Something we've all been aware of, even if it wasn't publicly emphasized. Given the current circumstances, joint authority seems not only appropriate but necessary to stabilize our relationships with lenders and investors." The vote was taken, with 12 members supporting the motion, Mercer opposing, and 1 abstention. The Emergency Financial Oversight Committee was established immediately, with both Mercer and me designated as required signatories on major transactions. As the board meeting concluded, Mercer remained seated, staring at the papers before him with barely contained fury. I gathered my documents calmly, exchanged pleasantries with several board members, and prepared to leave. Only when the room had emptied except for the 2 of us did Mercer speak. "Is this what you wanted? To humiliate me in front of the board? To undermine 50 years of leadership?" I regarded him thoughtfully. "No, Mercer. This is simply the first step in correcting an imbalance that has existed throughout our partnership. You chose to leave our marriage, to pursue a relationship with Catalina, to transfer assets beyond my reach. I'm choosing to ensure that doesn't result in the erasure of my contributions to everything we've built." "This isn't over," he warned, rising from his chair. "No," I agreed. "It's just beginning." The creation of the Emergency Financial Oversight Committee was merely the opening move in what would become an intricate chess game for control of the Thornfield empire. As news of the board's decision spread through the company and our industry networks, the narrative began to shift. What had initially been perceived as a simple, if somewhat scandalous, marital separation was now recognized as something more significant, a fundamental realignment of power within one of the country's most prestigious architectural development firms. Returning to my downtown office after the board meeting, I found Imani waiting with updates on our broader strategy. "The joint authority structure has already had an impact," she reported. Northwestern Mutual's lead negotiator called directly after hearing about the board's decision. They're willing to postpone any action on the Minneapolis project pending implementation of new governance measures. "And the Riverfront project investors?" 3 of the 5 concerned groups have expressed cautious optimism. They're still requesting additional documentation, but the immediate pressure has eased somewhat. I nodded, reviewing the latest financial reports on my tablet. "What about the St. Barthélemy accounts?" "Adelaide's regulatory inquiries are gaining traction. 2 of the primary financial institutions involved have initiated internal reviews based on governance concerns. No direct action on the accounts yet, but movement in that direction." "Good," I replied. "Keep pushing on all fronts. Mercer will be looking for ways to reassert control, to bypass the joint authority structure. We need to maintain momentum." Later that evening, as I reviewed documents in my home office, my phone rang with a call from an unexpected source. Catalina Reyes herself. "Mrs. Thornfield," she began, her voice carefully modulated. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Ms. Reyes," I replied, curious about her purpose. "How may I help you?" I wanted to speak with you directly about the situation with Mercer and the company." She paused, seemingly gathering her thoughts. "Things have become more complicated than I anticipated." "I imagine they have," I agreed neutrally. "What specifically did you wish to discuss?" Catalina hesitated, then spoke with unexpected frankness. "Mercer is not reacting well to the board's decision. He's making statements, plans that seem potentially harmful to the company and himself. I thought you should be aware." This was interesting, Catalina reaching out behind Mercer's back, apparently concerned about his behavior. Was it genuine worry or a calculated move to position herself favorably in an increasingly precarious situation? "What kind of statements and plans?" I asked. "He's talking about challenging the board's decision legally, about using contacts at certain financial institutions to create counter-pressure on projects. He mentioned reaching out to competitors about potential asset sales." Her voice lowered. "And he's drinking more than I've ever seen." The information was concerning, but not entirely surprising. Mercer had always responded to challenges with aggressive countermoves, and his relationship with alcohol had been complicated for decades, something I had managed discreetly throughout our marriage. "Thank you for sharing this, Ms. Reyes," I said carefully. May I ask why you're bringing this to my attention rather than supporting Mercer's position? Another pause, longer this time. Because I believe in the company's mission. Because I've worked on the riverfront project from its inception and don't want to see it damaged. And because... She drew a deep breath. Because the relationship with Mercer isn't what I expected. The person who emerged when things became difficult isn't the man I thought I knew. Interesting indeed. The ambitious young assistant was discovering what I had known for 50 years, that Mercer's charismatic confidence could transform into brittle pride and reckless anger when his authority was challenged. I appreciate your concern for the company, I said, deliberately not acknowledging the personal revelation. If you have specific information about planned actions that could undermine Thornfield Development's stability, I would certainly want to know about them. I'll keep you informed, she promised, then added hesitantly, Mrs. Thornfield, for what it's worth, I never intended to cause this level of disruption. My relationship with Mercer began as a genuine connection based on shared professional passion. Ms. Reyes, I replied evenly. Whatever genuine connection you believed existed, the timing of your relationship coincided precisely with Mercer's systematic movement of company assets beyond normal governance oversight. That suggests something considerably more calculated than shared professional passion. She didn't respond immediately, and when she did, her voice had cooled noticeably. I understand your perspective. I'll contact you if I become aware of specific plans that might harm the company. After we disconnected, I immediately called Adelaide to brief her on the conversation. You think she's being sincere? My daughter asked skeptically. I think she's recognizing that hitching her future to Mercer's star may have been a miscalculation, I replied. Whether her concern for the company is genuine or self-interested hardly matters. Her information could be valuable. Or deliberate misinformation, Adelaide cautioned. Father could be using her to mislead us about his intentions. Possible, I conceded, though I suspect Catalina is acting independently. The tone of disillusionment seemed authentic. Well, authentic or not, we should verify any information she provides before acting on it. The following morning brought confirmation of at least some of Catalina's warnings. Leopold called to report that Mercer had retained additional legal counsel, Sullivan and Crompton, a firm known for aggressive corporate litigation. They've requested all documentation related to the Emergency Financial Oversight Committee's formation, Leopold reported. Standard preparatory work for a potential challenge to the board's action. As expected, I noted unsurprised, they won't find any procedural vulnerabilities. The board acted within its authority under the bylaws, with appropriate quorum and majority. Agreed, but they'll look for other angles. Conflicts of interest, disclosure issues, anything to undermine the committee's legitimacy, Leopold cautioned. And Sullivan and Crompton are known for scorched earth tactics. This could get messy. Let them try, I replied confidently. The documentation of Mercer's undisclosed transfers provides more than adequate justification for the board's action. Any challenge will only result in further exposure of those irregularities. Even as Mercer prepared his legal counteroffensive, I continued implementing our broader strategy for consolidating control of the Thornfield portfolio. Imani and her team were methodically approaching key investors in Thornfield properties, with premium buyout offers through seemingly unrelated investment groups. These investors, many of whom had been brought into Thornfield projects through my relationships and financial networks, were surprised but generally pleased by the attractive terms. By the end of the week, the investment fund had secured significant positions in 3 major Thornfield properties, including a controlling interest in the Westlake District redevelopment, Mercer's first major success and the foundation of our early empire. The transactions were structured through intermediaries to avoid immediate connection to me, providing leverage that would become evident only when needed. Meanwhile, Edison had begun activating his connections in medical research philanthropy and area where he had established considerable influence through his cardiac innovation work. Several of these philanthropists were also significant investors in Thornfield's healthcare facility developments, a growing segment of our portfolio that included specialty clinics, research campuses, and wellness communities. 4 of the 5 primary investors in the Charleston Medical Campus have agreed to coordinate their position, Edison reported during our evening strategy session. Together, they control nearly 60% of the project's equity. If necessary, they can force significant governance changes at the project level. Adelaide had been equally effective in her domain, utilizing her international legal network to increase pressure on the St. Barthélemy financial institutions holding Mercer's transferred funds. The regulatory inquiries have accelerated, she explained, displaying a complex diagram of institutional relationships on the wall screen. 2 banks have implemented enhanced due diligence protocols specifically targeting fund transfers from U.S. real estate development entities. 1 has temporarily frozen transactions pending review. How is Mercer responding to these various pressure points? I asked Leopold, who had been monitoring the legal communications. Increasingly erratically, the attorney reported. Sullivan and Crompton have filed 3 separate demands for documentation in the past 48 hours, each with a different focus and argumentative approach. It suggests they're testing multiple strategies without a coherent plan. And operationally, I turned to Imani. He attempted to approve a $3 million transfer to the Minneapolis project yesterday without your countersignature. She confirmed. The financial controls we implemented blocked it automatically. The Treasury Department reported he was displeased. Displeased meaning? Edison prompted. Meaning he threatened to fire the entire Treasury team and reportedly threw his phone against the wall in the executive conference room. Imani elaborated with characteristic precision. I absorbed this information thoughtfully. Mercer's behavior was following a pattern I recognized from previous, though considerably less significant, challenges to his authority. Initial confident resistance, followed by aggressive countermeasures, deteriorating into emotional outbursts when those measures proved ineffective. The pattern typically culminated in either tactical retreat or impulsive, often self-damaging dramatic action. We need to prepare for both possibilities, I decided. If he retreats, he'll attempt to negotiate from a position of reduced leverage. If he chooses dramatic action, it will likely target what he perceives as the source of his current predicament, my role in the company. Adelaide nodded in agreement. We should accelerate securing control of key properties and projects. If he attempts something drastic, having majority positions in the most valuable assets would be our best protection. And we should consider a direct approach to the board, Edison suggested. Present a comprehensive plan for company leadership. Transition that addresses their concerns about stability while securing your rightful position. Both good suggestions, I agreed. Imani, prioritize acquisition efforts on the 10 most valuable properties in the portfolio. Adelaide, prepare regulatory escalation measures in case Mercer attempts to access the offshore funds despite the current reviews. Edison, develop the Healthcare Project Investor Coalition into a more formal alliance. Leopold, draft the leadership transition proposal for the board. As our team dispersed to implement these directives, I remained in my office, reviewing the latest financial reports from across the Thornfield empire. Despite the leadership turmoil, most projects continued to perform well, a testament to the solid operational structures I had built over decades. The immediate financial pressures we had created were targeted and strategic, designed to limit Mercer's options without damaging the underlying value of our developments. Just as I was preparing to leave for the evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Catalina. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. M claiming new evidence of financial irregularities, directed at you. So Mercer had chosen the dramatic action path rather than tactical retreat. I had anticipated this possibility, a desperate counter-accusation attempting to shift focus from his own financial misconduct. What I hadn't expected was how quickly he would move. I immediately called Leopold, Adelaide, and Edison to brief them on this development. Within an hour, our team had assembled in my home office, reviewing possibilities and preparing our response. What kind of evidence could he possibly have? Adelaide wondered. Your financial management has been impeccable. He'll focus on the investment fund, I predicted. The separate structure, the strategic positions it's been acquiring in Thornfield properties. He'll try to frame it as a conflict of interest or unauthorized competitive activity. Edison nodded in agreement. That makes sense. He'll attempt to reframe this entire situation as a power struggle you initiated, rather than a response to his actions. The timing works against him, Leopold noted. The investment fund was established 15 years ago, with his signed approval. Its activities only intensified after he began transferring assets offshore and planning his exit from the marriage. Facts and timing won't matter if he can create enough confusion and doubt among the board, I cautioned. We need to be prepared to address any accusation decisively and with complete documentation. Throughout the night, we prepared for every conceivable angle of attack, gathering documentation, preparing clear explanations of the investment fund's purpose and activities, and developing a comprehensive response to any suggestion of impropriety on my part. By morning, I felt prepared for whatever Mercer might attempt, though I harbored no illusions about the seriousness of this escalation. He was fighting not just for control of the company, but for his legacy, his public reputation, his self-image as the visionary creator of the Thornfield empire. In challenging that narrative, I had struck at something more valuable to him than even the wealth at stake. As Adelaide and I entered the Thornfield Tower that morning, the atmosphere was noticeably tense. Employees watched us pass with barely concealed curiosity and concern. The executive floor was eerily silent, the usual bustle of activity subdued. The boardroom doors were closed when we arrived, though the meeting wasn't scheduled to begin for another 15 minutes. I could hear raised voices inside. Mercer and someone else engaged in heated discussion. Adelaide and I exchanged glances, silently debating whether to enter or wait. The decision was made for us when the doors suddenly swung open and Bertrand Kavanaugh emerged, his face grave. Valencia, Adelaide. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Of course, I replied calmly. I understand Mercer has raised some concerns he wishes to discuss with the board. Kavanaugh nodded, his expression troubled. He's made significant allegations regarding the Thornfield Community Investment Fund and its recent activities. Given the serious nature of these claims, we felt an immediate board review was necessary. I appreciate the board's diligence, I said, maintaining my composed demeanor. I'm fully prepared to address any questions regarding the investment fund's structure, purpose, and activities. Kavanaugh hesitated, then added in a lower voice, Valencia, I should warn you. Mercer is not himself today. He's agitated, confrontational. Whatever happens in there, please remember that many of us have worked with both of you for decades and value your respective contributions to this company. Thank you, Bertrand. I understand completely. As we entered the boardroom, all eyes turned to us. The board members were already seated, expressions ranging from concern to discomfort. Mercer stood at the head of the table, a position he had insisted on maintaining despite the joint authority structure now in place. Beside him was a thin, sharp-featured man I recognized as Winston Crompton, the most aggressive partner at Sullivan and Crompton. Ah, here she is, Mercer announced, his voice carrying a brittle edge I recognized from the rare occasions when he'd had too much to drink. My wife of 50 years, my trusted partner, who has been secretly orchestrating a hostile takeover of our company while accusing me of financial misconduct. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table, Adelaide beside me, both of us projecting calm professionalism in stark contrast to Mercer's evident agitation. Good morning, everyone, I said evenly. I understand there are questions about The Thornfield Community Investment Fund that I'm happy to address. Questions? Mercer repeated incredulously. Valencia, your investment fund has been systematically acquiring positions in Thornfield properties, pressuring our financial partners and undermining my leadership, all while you accused me of improper asset transfers. Winston Crompton slid folders to each board member. The documentation before you outlines a pattern of competitive and potentially hostile actions by the Thornfield Community Investment Fund, an entity controlled exclusively by Mrs. Thornfield, against the interests of Thornfield Development. I allowed a moment for the board members to open the folders and scan the first few pages, then responded with measured precision. The Thornfield Community Investment Fund was established 15 years ago with full board knowledge and Mercer's signed approval, I began, nodding to Leopold, who distributed our own prepared documentation. Its charter explicitly includes supporting and investing in community development projects, including those adjacent to or complementary to Thornfield development initiatives. Elena Vasquez looked up from the competing documents, her expression thoughtful. The recent acquisitions of positions in Thornfield properties, these go beyond adjacent or complementary investments. They appear designed to establish controlling interests. The timing of those acquisitions is critical context, Adelaide interjected smoothly. They began after documented unauthorized transfers of company assets to offshore accounts and coincided with Mr. Thornfield's separation from my mother after 50 years of marriage. So you admit this is about revenge for our separation? Mercer pounced, his voice rising. No, I replied calmly. This is about protection and preservation of assets that were at risk due to your undisclosed financial maneuvers. The investment. Fund's activities were a defensive response to your actions, not an aggressive initiative. Crompton leaned forward, his thin lips curved in what barely qualified as a smile. Mrs. Thornfield, are you suggesting that using a separate entity to acquire positions in company properties without board knowledge was an appropriate defensive response? I'm stating unequivocally that establishing protection against unauthorized asset transfers that the board has already acknowledged represented serious governance breaches, was not only appropriate but necessary, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. The board has not made any final determination regarding those transfers, Crompton countered smoothly. The board established an emergency financial oversight committee specifically because of those transfers, Adelaide reminded everyone. That was an acknowledgement of serious concern, if not a final determination. Bertrand Kavanaugh cleared his throat, reclaiming control of the discussion. We seem to have a situation where both parties have taken actions outside normal governance channels, each claiming justification based on the other's conduct. This is precisely the kind of circular dispute that damages the company and serves no productive purpose. Murmurs of agreement came from several board members, relieved perhaps that someone had stated the obvious. What matters now, Kavanaugh continued, is how we move forward in a way that stabilizes the company, reassures our partners and investors, and preserves the value all of us, especially the Thornfields, have worked to create. This was the opening I had anticipated, the moment to present our comprehensive leadership transition plan. I nodded to Adelaide, who distributed the final set of documents we had prepared. The boardroom fell silent as the directors reviewed my leadership transition proposal. The document outlined a complete restructuring of Thornfield Development's executive team, with me assuming the role of executive chairwoman and Mercer transitioning to chief design visionary, preserving his creative influence while removing him from financial control. This isn't a transition plan. This is a coup, Winston Crompton said, his voice sharp with disdain. It's a recognition of reality, I countered calmly. For 50 years, Thornfield Development has operated on two pillars: Mercer's architectural vision and my financial architecture. The company's structure should reflect that dual foundation. Mercer slammed his hand on the table. This is outrageous. I built this company from nothing, My designs, my vision. Our vision, I corrected firmly. Our company, built with my financial strategies, my investor relationships, my risk management. The difference is that I've never demanded exclusive credit, while you've consistently positioned yourself as the sole creator of our success. After heated debate, the board voted to establish a 30-day evaluation period for the proposed restructuring. During that time, the Emergency Financial Oversight Committee would continue to exercise joint authority over major financial decisions. That evening, I received an urgent call from Bertrand Kavanaugh. Valencia, Mercer has reached out to Arcadia Partners about a potential sale of his interests in Thornfield Development. My blood ran cold. Arcadia was our most significant competitor, known for aggressive acquisitions and ruthless cost-cutting. A sale to them would undermine everything we'd built: our company culture, our community-focused development philosophy, our employee relationships. This is pure spite, Adelaide fumed when I shared the news. He'd rather destroy the company than see you lead it. Not destroy it, Edison corrected. Transform it into something unrecognizable. It's emotional blackmail. I needed a strategy to counter this existential threat. By morning, we had prepared injunction documentation and a response to Arcadia outlining the legal complexities of pursuing Mercer's offer. But I had developed another approach that struck at the heart of Arcadia's interest. After securing approval from the board's executive committee, Thornfield Development announced the creation of a design innovation division, headed by Xavier Martinez, Layla Washington, and Raj Patel, 3 senior architects who had worked alongside Mercer for decades while receiving fraction of his recognition despite their significant contributions. The announcement was carefully crafted to honor Mercer's historical contributions while establishing Thornfield's design capabilities as institutional rather than dependent on a single visionary. The financial markets responded positively, with our stock price rising 3% by lunchtime. Harrison Wellington of Arcadia called Kavanaugh directly, inquiring about the timing of the announcement and its relationship to Mercer's overture. Learning that the board was fully aware of Mercer's Arcadia discussions and had taken preemptive action significantly cooled Wellington's interest. By afternoon, Arcadia was reconsidering the strategic fit of Mercer's offer, diplomatic language, for withdrawal. That evening, my security system announced an unexpected visitor, Mercer himself, alone. He looked exhausted as he entered, the confident magnate replaced by a tired man in his 70s. Valencia, he began without preamble. We need to talk. Directly, without lawyers or children or board members between us. I gestured to the sofa. I'm listening. He sank down, running a hand through his silver hair. The design innovation. Division was a clever move, preemptive and elegant. I'd expect nothing less from you. It wasn't merely tactical, I replied. Xavier, Layla, and Raj have deserved greater recognition for years. He nodded slowly. That's fair. They're talented. He paused. Arcadia has withdrawn their interest in my offer, which brings me to the purpose of my visit. I want to discuss a different approach, one that might serve both our interests better than continued warfare. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite my wariness. I've had time to reflect, he continued. I still believe my contributions to Thornfield Development have been foundational, but I recognize that your financial architecture has been equally essential, if less publicly acknowledged. This qualified acknowledgement, while incomplete, represented the first crack in Mercer's narrative of sole creatorship. Rather than Chief Design Visionary, a title that frankly sounds like a consolation prize, I would propose Co-Executive Chairman, with clear division of responsibilities. You would oversee financial strategy, investor relations, and operational governance. I would maintain authority over design direction, client relationships, and brand positioning. It was a significant shift from his previous stance, offering genuine shared leadership rather than merely symbolic recognition of my contributions. And the St. Barthélemy accounts? I asked directly. The 65 million transferred without proper authorization? His expression tightened. Those funds would be repatriated to the company with appropriate governance oversight. A necessary gesture of good faith, I recognize. And Catalina's position? A flash of discomfort crossed his features. Catalina's professional capabilities remain valuable to the company. Her personal relationship with me is a separate matter. I studied him carefully. Why now, Mercer? What's changed since you walked out our door with your Burberry luggage while Catalina waited in the Tesla? He flinched slightly. Several things have changed. The board's response to your leadership proposal was more favorable than I anticipated. The Design Innovation Initiative demonstrated institutional capability beyond my personal contribution. And he hesitated. Certain personal realizations have occurred. Personal realizations, I repeated neutrally. Would these have anything to do with Catalina's increasing disillusionment with your behavior since returning from St. Barthélemy? His head snapped up in surprise. You've spoken with Catalina. She's reached out several times, I confirmed. Initially to express concern about your potentially self-destructive actions. More recently to share information about your Arcadia overture. Mercer's expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally resignation. Yes, Catalina and I have experienced what might diplomatically be called adjustment difficulties since returning. The relationship has proven more complex in the context of real-world pressures. Translation: the romance was already faltering, adding to his motivation for seeking resolution. This context was valuable for assessing the sustainability of any agreement we might reach. I'm open to discussing a negotiated leadership structure, I said carefully. However, any such arrangement must include complete financial transparency, full repatriation of transferred assets, and genuine shared authority, not merely the appearance of partnership with hidden power imbalances. Over the next 2 weeks, Leopold worked directly with Mercer's attorneys to draft a comprehensive leadership agreement. The resulting framework preserved the executive chairwoman position for me while creating a parallel creative chairman role for Mercer, with clearly defined authorities and joint approval requirements for strategic decisions. Most importantly, the agreement included mandatory repatriation of all offshore funds, comprehensive financial transparency protocols, and formal acknowledgement of our respective contributions to building the Thornfield empire. When we met again, to review the final draft, Mercer seemed different, contemplative rather than defensive. These past weeks have been educational, he said finally. Seeing the company through others' eyes has clarified certain realities I had perhaps chosen not to examine too closely over the years. What realities? I prompted. That my architectural vision, while genuinely valuable, was never sufficient on its own. That the financial architecture you created was not merely supportive, but foundational. That the empire we built truly was a partnership, even if I claimed disproportionate credit. He met my gaze directly. I owe you an acknowledgement of that reality, and an apology for failing to recognize it properly throughout our 50 years together. The admission was unexpected, almost disorienting in its sincerity. For decades, I had been content to stand in Mercer's shadow. But hearing him finally acknowledge the truth of our partnership affected me more deeply than I had anticipated. Thank you, I said simply. That recognition matters. And Catalina? I asked, still relevant to assessing our new arrangement's stability. Catalina has accepted a position in Chicago, he replied. She'll be leaving Thornfield at the end of the month. Our personal relationship has concluded. So the romance that had ended our 50-year marriage had itself ended within weeks. I felt no vindication, only sadness for the unnecessary disruption to so many lives. I hope she finds fulfillment in her new role, I said neutrally. Mercer studied me with a hint of wonder. Your composure remains remarkable, Valencia. Even now you can speak generously about the woman I left you for after 50 years of marriage. Catalina was a catalyst, not the cause, I replied. Our marriage had fundamental imbalances long before she entered the picture. Perhaps this outcome was inevitable once I decided to stop accepting those imbalances. The board unanimously approved our leadership framework the following day. The press waited outside Thornfield Tower after the announcement. For the first time in 50 years, I stood beside rather than behind Mercer at a company milestone, my contribution acknowledged explicitly. Thornfield development has always rested on two foundational pillars, Mercer told the journalists. My architectural vision and Valencia's financial architecture. Today, our leadership structure finally reflects that reality. A reporter directed her question to me. Mrs. Thornfield, after 50 years largely out of the public eye, how does it feel to step into this more visible leadership role? I've never sought public recognition, I replied. But proper acknowledgement of contributions matters, not just for me personally, but for the next generation of financial architects who deserve to see their work valued equally alongside creative design. Another journalist raised the inevitable question. Given your recent separation after 50 years of marriage, how will this joint leadership structure function practically? Professional partnership doesn't require personal intimacy, I answered. Only shared vision, mutual respect, and appropriate governance structures, all of which are now formally established. As we stepped away from the microphones, Mercer leaned slightly closer. You were always meant to stand in this position, equal, acknowledged, respected. I regret that it took these circumstances to make that reality visible. I met his gaze steadily. Better late than never, Mercer. 3 years have passed since that press conference. Thornfield and Thornfield Development, as we renamed the company, has thrived under our joint leadership structure. The design innovation division has produced some of our most celebrated projects, while my financial strategies have expanded our portfolio into emerging markets and sustainable development sectors. Mercer and I maintain a cordial professional relationship, focused exclusively on the company's interests. We never reconciled personally. Some betrayals run too deep for genuine restoration. He lives alone in a modern apartment overlooking the harbor, while I remain in our former home, now truly mine in both name and spirit. Catalina flourished in her Chicago position and recently accepted a prestigious urban planning role in Copenhagen. She and I exchange occasional professional correspondence, having developed an unexpected mutual respect. She was young and ambitious. Mercer was charming and powerful. Their relationship was predictable, if ill-fated. The property portfolio I reclaimed now encompasses over 200 developments across 3 continents, valued at nearly $3 billion. My name appears beside Mercer's on every building, every report, every award, the financial architect finally acknowledged alongside the design visionary. Sometimes I'm asked if I regret the end of my marriage, if 50 years of shared history deserved a different conclusion. My answer is always the same. I don't regret the marriage ending. I regret that it took ending the marriage to achieve the recognition and respect I earned through 5 decades of partnership. Every morning, I walk through the atrium of Thornfield Tower, passing the newly installed dual portraits, Mercer with his architectural plans, me with my financial projections, equal in size, equal in prominence, equal in acknowledgement of contribution. Not revenge, but correction. Not destruction, but reclamation. Every property, every investment, every brick and beam, finally under the proper shared attribution. Up. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.